Okay, good morning. I am Colby Bracey. This is Sean Driscoll. We are members of the Chamber's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Today, we are going to be doing a short conversation just about what is DEI, especially in a business context, as we are the Chamber of Commerce. We'll be talking a little bit about the definitions of this term, about diversity, equity, and inclusion, how we got into the work, and some practical tips as far as implementing DEI in your business. So, again, this is me, Colby. I currently am the HR director at the No Nantum Resort, and I have my own HR consulting business called Hello Human.
Thanks, Colby. And I'm Sean Driscoll, principal and founder of BB Squared, which is Breaking Barriers, Building Bridges. And I feel fortunate to have created my own consulting platform back in 2016 after a professional career in private sector corporate. And now I get to work with different partners and clients of various types and sizes on mostly DEI related or focused work. And I used to be headquartered out of Cambridge, Massachusetts, but now I'm headquartered out of Kennebunk-Port, Maine.
Great. So Sean will start off by talking a little bit about this poster, which appears in every Chamber newsletter.
Yeah, so, I, as a newer member myself, partially because of that change in footprint life, both living and working, I used to experience Kennebunkport as kind of a second home or by living thing, and kind of viewed it as more of an escape weekend thing and not really my working landscape. But in 2020, we made that shift from Massachusetts to Maine, which was a long time coming, and very happy to have done it. And so my business identity shifted from Massachusetts to Maine. And I knew about the Chamber and had kind of, it had been swirling around, and for no real reason hadn't joined until this year, 2023. And it happened all around the Chamber actually creating this banner that I started to see in all of its communications and things that it would put out. Everyone is welcome here. And it was really something that intrigued me and struck me as a member that joined, that this kind of a message was coming from our local Chamber. And I think it's a great tone, sets a great tone for what Colby and I are going to talk about today.
Absolutely. So to start off, we'll go over some of the distinctions between diversity, equity, and inclusion. So diversity is the makeup of an organization, the differences of each person's characteristics, identities, etc. It is kind of the noun of DEI. It's what is it? Then we'll move to inclusion, which is the behavior that welcomes and embraces the diversity. It's the how. How do you implement DEI? And it's a measure of culture that enables diversity to thrive within your organization. Equity is, in my opinion, the most nuanced aspect of DEI, and we'll talk more in depth about each of these terms in a bit. But it is the empowered awareness, acknowledging and managing natural bias, taking inclusion to the next level of application. So I really like this little bit at the bottom that diversity can exist in an organization, but if inclusion is not present, then the diversity doesn't really matter. And kind of what that means is you can have all kinds of different people within your organization. You can say we've hired, this race and this gender, but if you're not doing the work to make them feel like they're part of your organization and that they belong there and their ideas are valued, it really doesn't matter that you've hired them. They're still being ostracized, cast aside, and generally in this other group of people. So the D and the I really work strongly together, and then E will be incorporated a little bit later.
So as Colby and I worked on the frame of this little session for what the Go Kennebunks is considering kind of a kickoff series to their commitment to DEI, we thought a little bit about what happens for each of us when we experience, intersecting with diversity, hearing the word, reacting to it, reading the word diversity, just kind of what of those guttural, maybe emotive reactions that each of us might have. And so I always like to start such a thought process for any of us when we're together talking about these important topics and these interesting topics, to kind of start with this blank screen or this blank slate. And so that's what we are doing here with this slide. And then slowly we're just going to start to populate this slide. I'm going to let everybody read them as they come in. And so as the slide was blank for the first, 15 or so seconds as I was introing this concept, I am guessing, hoping that maybe you all in your own minds started to think a little bit about what was in your mind when you saw the title of this slide. What is it? What is diversity? What is it that you think of first? What is top of mind for you right now, maybe with something that's going on for you or in your paths of work and personal life and community life, et cetera. And this slide has been constructed by us, Colby and me, thinking about some of these different aspects or layers of what diversity is. I am thinking that for some of you, maybe there are some things that popped in here that maybe are unexpected for you. Maybe you've never really thought of some of these things as part of diversity or what you would have defined or kind of categorized as diversity. So it's something that we hope has sparked that in some of you. It's a beginning of thinking about how broad and how vast and how deep diversity can be. It's a pretty big spectrum. It's a pretty big sphere of these different things that make us who we are and what others are. And it's somewhat of a fluid universe in some aspects. And I say fluid in the instance that some of these things are kind of stationary and maybe more permanent. Some of these things are things that might morph or evolve for any of us in our lives if you read some of these different things. And so really more than anything, we wanted to kind of get that thought process going as part of this little talk we're doing this morning. And the last thing that I'll say is maybe something that's obvious to some of you is specifically or deliberately, you did not see race or traditional gender identity listed here. And that was purposeful by Colby and myself, that, there have been parts of the diversity legacy that those were the top of mind things, or the always starting things, or the things that people focused on. They are certainly there and important, but they're not all of it. And so at the end of this slide, we hope that we've kind of sparked your thought process around this, and that you'll leave thinking a little bit more about what diversity is when you have those moments of hearing it, reading it, or traveling it.
Mm-hmm. I also love the idea that someone's identity can shift. When we think about traditional diversity or race, for example, it's the same for your life, obviously, but your income level could change, your habits could change, your hobbies could change. So I love thinking about it in that way, that you're not just a person for life. I mean, obviously you're a person, but you're not this person for your whole life. So I appreciate you bringing that up, John.
Thanks. So coming from that concept of what the universe of diversity is and what all its different pieces can be, it starts to create this concept of how we carry all of that, what that is for each of us and what that could be for other people. And there are two concepts we're going to talk about here that you see on this slide. One is intersectionality, and then the other is self-identification. This graphic that you see on the right-hand side of the slide, that is basically a circle of multiple circles, right? So if you kind of could draw a line around all the different colored circles, it's like one circle. And then there are all these multiple circles within that circle. And they are at times overlapping or intersecting, and maybe at other times not doing that, right? On the outer portions of these inner circles. And so this graphic hopefully will help all of us think a little bit about these concepts of intersectionality and self-identification. So intersectionality is this idea that these multiple spinning spheres or circles, part of any one of us, is what creates all of who we are, right? We aren't just one identity. we are multiple identities. If you think about that prior slide, there are all these different pieces or layers to what makes up who each of us are. And it's very interesting to think about how those identities exist for any of us, and the concept of how we manage those things, and how I use the term how we carry them, or how we roll with our identities. And it's a good metaphor for the wheel, that, you know, it's an interesting thing to think about if you never have, about how do I manage all of those different pieces, and how do I exist with them in different landscapes or with different backdrops. And it's an interesting thing to think about in terms of this universe of diversity and this universe of all these multiple identities. And so this concept of the, I guess, the verb, well, Colby talked about verb and the importance of verb in terms of DEI. Self-identification is that concept of how do we attribute these different things that make us who we are, how we self-identify, and how we do that. It's sometimes where we might do it very outwardly. Maybe sometimes it's something we don't do very outwardly, because some of the identities, as you can imagine, are not obvious necessarily. They're kind of below our surface, right? And so these two concepts become important in terms of diversity and thinking about it. And we're hoping that much of what we're doing here today is hopefully having you leave this little session thinking about these things for yourself and about other people, and the traveling that you do. And so this, again, back to this graphic wheel, sometimes this concept of this wheel can be our own wheel, but then you could also think of all these different little circles or spheres as, say you are in a work team at work, and that you have these different wheels, right? Sometimes you overlap with each other in a way that you might cross-connect, have something similar. At other times, maybe our wheels are different, and we have these outer sections that are different from one another. So again, it's this interesting concept of the identities of diversity in action, and kind of what's happening for each of us. And back to what Colby was saying, that you know, things can slightly change with how we manage and carry our wheels based upon our life experiences and the part of life that we're in, and sometimes the places that we're in, work, community, life. So just interesting concepts for you to all be thinking about as you leave today.
Absolutely. That was a very palatable way to talk about diversity, I think. So we will move on to inclusion. So inclusion means that people across varying identities are and feel valued, welcomed, respected, included, represented, heard. They fully belong in their organization. So your business, but also it could be, you know, your friend group, your family. Just you have this sense of belonging. You can be authentic. You can contribute to the group and have a voice. So inclusion in the workplace really creates a sense of belonging among coworkers, and that can translate to greater productivity, more innovation, better decision making, and team performance will improve when employees are feeling more connected. So just a few little tidbits about what an inclusive work environment is. It retains more employees than a non-inclusive work environment. It grows faster. It enables all employees to work in a way that suits them, which I think is really important in this conversation. When somebody wants every single employee to be a robot and do things the exact same way, it doesn't work for people. It doesn't make them feel like their individuality is heard. And maybe that person just can't be productive in that way, but they can be productive in their own way. I think that's critical, and it has healthier employees. So I think that having employees that feel like they belong is really critical to the success of a business. It'll make your employees stay longer. It will make them more focused on work, more engaged in work, and more engaged with each other. It's just a more desirable experience for everybody within your organization. And if you are a business that sells something, or is a service type business where you have customers and clients coming in, they'll be able to feel that too. I know I've been to businesses where I can tell that the people who work there are just miserable, And I've been to places where it seems like they're having fun and they get along and they're treated well. And it makes me as a consumer want to go to those businesses where I know that the people, or I presume that the people, are being treated nicely and as individuals and humans. Anything to add about inclusion, Sean?
I as you were sharing all of these important, wonderful things about inclusion, it makes me think about, as we each travel every day and find ourselves in different settings, to be mindful or try to stay mindful in terms of how we are emanating kind of atmosphere, right, or presence around us. It's something that I think each of us have the power to own and also have some influence over. If you think about, to your point, I love your point, Colby, about as human beings, we kind of can have that guttural innate sense of like the vibe of a space, right? You can kind of tell sometimes if you're in a place that doesn't feel kind of warm and open and inviting versus the makings of an atmosphere and the components of an atmosphere that you just get a different sense or different feeling. And I think, whether we are at work, our normal work setting, or we are going into somebody else's space. I think sometimes of going to community events or spaces. I know in my life around business networking, and going up to like networking events and things that you can do, like walking up to a person who's standing at a high top table all by themselves and striking up a conversation. Simple things sometimes that can really change the tone of that feeling of an inclusive environment. So just some thoughts to kind of bring it back to your point, Colby, about something that's very touchable or something that we can each think about doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And now equity. Equity is, like I said earlier, the most nuanced, I think, part of DEI. And it is defined as the fair treatment and access to the fair treatment for possible advancement for each person in any organization. So what that means is that not that everybody will have the exact same set of tools, but that they will be treated fairly given their own starting. So an equitable work environment is tailored to each employee's needs. It values skills, knowledge, and abilities, and it exercises fairness in pay and advancement. We received a question in advance of this talk about what the difference between equity and equality is, and I think that is a very frequently asked question and a valid one. So I found this graphic that I think really demonstrates that difference. So equality means giving everyone identical resources and opportunities, whereas equity is about treating people justly based on their particular circumstances, and it allocates the exact resources and opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome. So what I'm seeing here is that equality is equal tools, whereas equity is equal outcome. So in the illustration here, the two individuals have unequal access to a system, which in this case is the tree with fruit, with equal support from the evenly distributed tools, so like the ladders that are exactly the same height, their access to the fruit remains unequal. And so the equitable solution would be to give each individual the size ladder that they need, the tool that they need, in order to enable them to access the fruit equally. So it'll lead to a positive outcome for both of the individuals. And the complication with equity is coming to an agreement on what is just and what is fair, and truly identifying where you're starting. It's hard to measure, right? So the concept is subjective, and it makes it very complex. But to get to an equitable place within your own business, as a business leader, you need to start by recognizing the reality that everybody does have a unique position in life, and then start offering resources to level the playing field. So it can be things like utilizing skills-based hiring rather than hiring on education level alone. Maybe somebody just didn't have the financial resources for higher education, and unless the position really does require that, or some sort of professional certification or something like that, maybe there's some sort of skills test that you can administer to see if that person has the knowledge and the skills to do the job, but maybe doesn't have the degree. You could also provide resources that are accessible to a range of abilities. One example that I thought of as we were doing this is that your company is providing a training, and the training is video-based, and your conference room is on the second floor of the building, and there's no elevator. And so this automatically might exclude people who are wheelchair users. Since it's a video-based training, it could exclude people who are hard of hearing or deaf, or people who struggle with auditory processing. So that training, just by putting it out there and inviting all of your employees, it's the equal thing to do. But the equitable thing to do would be to put it in a space that would be accessible to people who might have the physical limitations, like using a wheelchair. You might make the video have closed captions so that people who are hard of hearing or just learn better by reading could access it. And that way, everybody will get the same information in the way that works best for them. So hopefully that answered that question. Any thoughts on equity?
I think your examples are great. And I think the visual purely is that proverbial saying of a picture paints 1,000 words. I think it really is about this sometimes unthought, not intentionally, but we don't think of, or we miss that kind of gap or that chasm that the left picture illustrates. And so I think it's great, Colby. Thank you.
Thank you.
So on the heels of Colby's overview of that nuanced, and it is nuanced and somewhat complicated, the distinctions sometimes are how we are able to recognize that distinction between equality and equity. Sometimes it's this slight elevation of awareness or thought, right, around something. And equality at its base level is a good concept, but then equity kind of further illustrates that unthought of gap, right? That little thing that can make it better. And so this, I think, is a similar concept when we think about this concept of the golden rule versus the platinum rule. So I think most of us remember, it's something I know I learned eons ago when I was young. It's one of those little, principles we learn when we're young, right? And it's this really good intentioned premise around the golden rule is treat others the way that you'd like to be treated, right? That you'd wish to be treated. And we say to ourselves, gee, that sounds like a pretty good solid tenet to work by. So as I'm talking about this and you see this descriptor labeled platinum rule, the platinum rule, I wonder if any of you are thinking in your minds, well, what could the platinum rule be? So we'll fill it in here for you and see if what you were thinking is possibly in line with what this is. And so the platinum rule becomes treat others the way they wish to be treated. And what it all of a sudden makes any of us think of is that the way that I want to be treated in a certain instance or because of something might be different for someone else. And that's diversity, right? That's diversity. They could have two different people could have different desires / needs / wants in life, at work, etc. And so you say to yourself, wow, the golden rule, which isn't certainly a bad idea or seems pretty good, this concept of the platinum rule kind of hits the mark a little more closely. And it's a great way to think about this concept of all of these concepts relative to self versus to others, right? Diversity is wide, expansive, etc. But then we can think about how it swirls around each of us individually, collectively, as an organization, etc. And it's really, I think, a fascinating concept to think about. So this, experiencing and managing diversity requires certain things for all of us. And it is being cognizant of these kind of things that are below the surface, right? How we feel, how we think, our emotions. One big topic in the DEI realm of the last many years has been this concept of generational difference, right? We experience life, we grow up in different time chapters, different things are happening in the world and around us. get different messaging maybe in the time that we're living. And so generational differences amongst coworkers and different people, it's something we have to navigate, right? That we have to kind of be aware of, monitor, think about for ourselves, think about for others. And that we each come from different life experiences and backgrounds, right? That we have different things that have become important to us, maybe our families, maybe our communities, that over time we create our own work styles and communication preferences and all these different things, right? So it's a lot swirling around us, but just thinking about it and attempting to become more aware day after day helps all of us in being in spaces together where these concepts that I think are important about leading with listening, that's kind of a oxymoron, right? Or kind of like counterintuitive, right? Leading by listening, not talking first or being the loudest in a room, meeting in the middle around communicating and consensus building, and ultimately, recognizing strengths of others. We each have our own strengths, and we would all admit as human beings, we have our weaknesses. So if you can find everybody's strengths in the room, adding all of those together really gets us to a better place and a better product and a better outcome.
Absolutely. So in addition to leading with listening, we also can lead through inclusion. So I wanted to acknowledge, I think, a few things as business leaders here. DEI is hard. And so it certainly can feel overwhelming, and that's okay. Not everybody's going to agree on everything all of the time. I think that, or I know that there's been a lot of feelings about DEI, and even just the development of the Chamber's DEI committee, there was some pushback on it. And I think it's because people don't understand really the heart of it. It's really about making sure that people, in a work setting, it's about making sure that people feel like they are included at work, they're treated fairly, they're given opportunities that they should be given. It's really just about creating an equal playing field. And so to talk about that, if people are disagreeing with what you're doing in your company's DEI space, just try to hear them, see what their thoughts are. Why are they dissenting? What is it that they're disagreeing about? But by doing that, by being more accepting of what people's concerns might be, it can help you and them experience it with less difficulty. You can, by talking more about DEI and what you're doing, as well as what other people's concerns are, makes it less scary. And then there's the whole social justice aspect, which we'll say for a whole other webinar, but that can even further complexify, in other words, I don't know, things. It can feel intense, people get angry, and that's okay too. Just talk more about it. Everyone has their own perspective, and that's important. Conflict can certainly arise in a more diverse atmosphere. So not only can the conflict be that people are against diversity, it can be that you have a diverse group and that there's conflict. I recently read Prince Harry's book, and he talks a bit about how his wife Meghan, who's American, and his sister-in-law Kate, who is British, has some conflict, and it was really just a communication barrier because of cultural differences. And you would think that those two ladies aren't super different people, but they had some pretty intense conflict, and it was really just because in the United States we're really open, we talk about things, and in England they're really not. And so Kate was taking some of Meghan's comments to be invasive or just kind of rude, and she didn't mean it that way. She was being friendly. So to have that perspective and knowledge that even within your own diverse population, there can still be conflict. And if you feel like you're doing the right thing and you're hiring all these different people, they might disagree too. And finally, as colleagues, we can embrace DEI landscapes at times when the human inclination is to not to. And I think just by virtue of being here on this webinar, you are interested in DEI, you would like to implement some of these tactics into your business. So do it. there you will get pushback. It's hard to do, and it can feel overwhelming. But even by just doing one small thing, you're taking a step forward. So don't feel like you have to go and rearrange your whole organization and hire a new set of people and everything like that. Just going out of your way to be more inclusive to one person who maybe has some sort of difference that is casting them aside, to bring them into the fold and just see where it goes from there. So that is just a little bit of encouragement for you as leaders. We'll talk a bit about ourselves as chamber members and then talk a little bit about the DEI committee, and then we'll wrap up.
So, you know, as Colby and I thought about putting this together, we thought a little bit about ourselves as members, right? Because we are all part of something bigger, and we're a peer-to-peer network at the end of the day, with these people who come together around some kind of shared interests around work, right? Work, professions, businesses, companies, and we all have some kind of cross-connection identity to this geography, right? In some way, shape, or form. Some of us have smaller footprints, maybe, where we feel more local, regional. At times we can have companies, for example, that exist within this region, but that have much bigger identities. But we all come together around these shared concepts of work, commerce, employees, and consumers. And so as part of this, we come together for a reason, right? We want to cross-connect. We want to be there with each other, for each other. I'm a small business, so I definitely have an interest at times of meeting other small business owners, where I always say as small businesses, sometimes we lack the benefit of coworkers or big, cross-employee spaces all the time. And so this kind of a vehicle, a chamber, can be really important in terms of collegial shoulder, each other's shoulders and leaning on each other. And I think it's around this that I feel Go Kennebunks really approaches all of the work they do, and that includes DEI and their commitment to DEI. And I think it's such a great cornerstone or baseline to start from, in terms of the connections that we share and the connections that we can build, and how we can learn from each other and grow individually and collectively. So for us, I think that's really how we're thinking about this commitment to DEI of and from the chamber, and as individual members too. And it's been great. Colby and I really got to know each other through this last several months, even though we've existed here separately for a long time. And it's great relationships like this that we get to know each other and we get to partner together and go forward, hopefully improved and more successful.
Definitely. I've met lots of people through the chamber, and even more people through the DEI committee. So this committee has existed for about a year now. I'm the chair of the committee. We are full of volunteers. You can be somebody who is either on the chamber board or not. Actually, the majority of the committee is not on the chamber board. But we are busy working on activities and programming that will help all of our members, the chamber members, to grow in the DEI space. And so it's things like these types of webinars. We'll be doing them every 8-ish weeks. The next one is going to be in the winter time about preparing and considerations for an aging workforce. But we're also doing things like looking for grants for businesses to retrofit their space to be wheelchair accessible. We are working on a certification that we'll be giving out to businesses who really embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion within their businesses. So lots of different things going on with the committee. If you're interested in participating and would like to join the committee, definitely feel free to reach out to me. You can email me. We meet the last Wednesday of every month at 8:30 at the chamber. And I think that's about it. I'll put our contact information up if you wanted to email either Sean or myself. But we really appreciate everyone's attendance today. And we look forward to the continued support of this platform that will help our chamber and our chamber members to flourish, especially with respect to inclusivity.
Yeah, agreed, Colby. And quickly, before I forget, we had a couple of pre-submitted questions and we saved this one for the end. The other question nicely worked within one of Colby's slide, but we kind of saved this one for the end of session. And we got a great question around American Disabilities Act, or ADA compliance, and how that intersects with playgrounds in communities. And so it's a really interesting question. It's not a slam dunk, easy, quick question. The American Disabilities Act is an amazing thing. The US is one of few countries that has any kind of construct like that. It's several decades old now that it was created, and it, as a big existing law and framework, has morphed and evolved over the years. So the longstanding ADA description around an accessible playground is one that offers a range of play experiences to children of varying abilities. There must be an accessible path from a building or a parking lot to the edge of the play area, and an accessible path from the edge of the play area to play equipment. So that's kind of been the long-standing baseline for what is considered an ADA compliant playground. Interestingly enough, as a big construct that can evolve over time, around 2010, there were some new ADA standards around accessible design for playgrounds, and it incorporated another piece around surfacing that would comply with what's considered accessible surface systems. Again, kind of a morph of this baseline. And lastly, the last thing that I'll say is in a handful of last years, people who are experts in this realm, they talk about the distinction between what is ADA compliant and what is an all-inclusive playground, which would go above and beyond ADA baseline compliance. So that's why there's no easy answer to this. We certainly, Colby or I, would not pretend to speak on behalf of any public playground and or its qualification as a compliant or an all-inclusive playground. But the ADA is something to always lean into, and anybody who is interested in the accessibility of a playground, if it's public, should always go to the right authority if you're questioning something around accessibility, and the owner of that should be responsive. Couple of quick websites that ada.gov is where you'd find information about the ADA and everything that it covers, and a couple of other helpful ones that I think have great little articles and write-ups about accessible playgrounds, or playgroundsafety.org, playgroundsafety, one word, .org, and playworld.com. Two good sites to check out. So great question, a lot there. It's lucky we have in this country something called the ADA to have as a guide and as a fallback. And I just want to say, Colby, thank you so much for doing this with me. It was great working on this together. I want to give a shout out and a thank you to Laura and team at Go Kennebunks. We're lucky to have a chamber that works so hard and that is so committed to including members. And to Colby's point, the work only matters if we're all in it together. So the committee is a live committee that looks for input from members and ideas, and I will gladly continue to participate on the committee with Colby. Thanks so much, Colby and Chamber.
Thank you.